they've been vetted. This organization has no connection to any of the claimants. No, nobody works for that organization.
Yes,
Chelsea does not.
she did for a while.
What's the
She doesn't now. Compared to the smelly red of the sewer.
I just think it's the
this guy is more important than that actually? Influence or care about it? What can we talk about? What do we know about? What is he? What company?
Jesus. Come on.
16.7 billion revenue. This is a big kick-ass company. $2 billion in net profit after tax. Don't fuck the back of it. 260 cases going on, and I can't give it to you. 5.4 million customers. 5.4 million customers. In 11 territories.
They're on the cutting edge. You said.
Intellectually.
They got a lot of people. So yeah, they got a lot of people.
They said they might be on the cutting edge.
They do.
You said that.
Yeah, you said they're intellectually.
They confirmed it.
They were, yes, they were really doctors. Mainly most of the resources there. They got international. We speak from
Really?
yeah.
It's an interesting.
Yeah.
You can only be holding hands.
They bought Texas utilities. Water transmission. Connected.
He's going to talk about.
They got away with it.
He's going to talk about distribution. That's the future. That's going to give us some questions.
Exactly.
So you want me to know? You want me to listen?
No.
I guess that's what it is.
He's using my trick. It's the language. Okay.
What if?
No, I don't want to listen. I want to engage her.
He's a subtle networker.
Oh, he's up, yeah, he's great.
Here we are, like, working. Turns out.
When we go to this together, we should record it. You got it. You got it.
Reviewing your.
Normally, this is awful close.
That's my favorite statistic every time we were reciting. I did this to you. Hi, David.
The image of your face when we see it.
Yeah, you know, just
First to look somewhere.
but just the last 40 or 20. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah.
No, you're doing only that.
I know that's what it looks like.
Steve, we crossed our deadline for the meeting. It was Thursday.
No, it's Friday. And I got several people looking at it.
Do you?
I've got the CEO of the ICC.
Any current or ex?
Okay, which is better than the current. I've got sort of like a guy who bounced around the industry, which would do private equity firm or for Blackstone. Sort of business, principal professor. So they're going to sit here with feedback. I've got two guys at consulting firms looking at it. I guess it's a not-for-profit. CGEP. Center for Clean Energy. CGEP. He's co-sponsoring.
It's also in front of the guy that wrote the article, who sent around for an exemption. Bill Arnson. I got a current partner in the Accenture who's knows him to introduce us. Send an email. They should be implementing. The perfect thing would be for Accenture to implement this into a APS or somebody.
No, I agree. They're good cheerleaders for the other side.
What is the idea outcome of this?
They send an email.
To me, I think we want to get an idea of what the problem is. That's all. The positive. You don't want to go back and say,
You don't think that I'm a bit
well, you could be.
I don't say this about you, that when you talk to me, don't make sure that I never say that. Constantly both of you tell me that I'm wrong.
Well, that's because you said you were going to attack it.
No, I get to engage in it.
Engage in it. Why is the positive? That's all. You take advice from me?
Oh, I love to see more of that. So this is the streamlined in the future. We also run this. So I'll jump in.
Who's moderating? Steve? Who's moderating?
I think it's not very good.
I'm most definitely very good picture. 25 years, he made me make this. So, our game is to change a lot. So we can kind of, and then,
They're sort of like that. These guys are crazy.
yeah. Yes, earlier this week. Yes. Oh, it's kind of. We've got these and solution now. What do you talk about? Very interesting. So, talk about the intuition. Right. So, yeah. A lot of people out there are actually. So, but I'm also a realist. Yeah. And I don't think that anyone said it's a little
It was what I had thought. Yeah, I was going to send a 18 font reminder. 36 and then red. Normally we ask one question. One of the first things I'm going to do is get you the secretary of the treasury. And send you all kinds of addresses.
Or you can do two. What's the deal with your social
Oh, is that right?
Yes, good.
Nick Akins. Nice to see you. Hi, Chip. Nice to see you. In your storage. Yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and somehow your
So the next stage of energy storage development now.
Go ahead and bring it out now. Develop this, work with these high skills.
Yeah.
To this part, we want to get out there and show,
Oh, yeah. Oh, we're definitely interested in energy storage. We want to stay on the forefront of it. We're thinking of it in terms of applications, not only with renewables, but also in terms of, we have like commercial customers that we can obviously charges and this kind of thing. Yeah, you would think we'd probably sit there and say, we don't want to pay the demand charges, but that's not the case. We really want to continue that relationship with the customer. And it's a great benefit for us. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Then you go to the other side.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so from an infrastructure standpoint, and the way things are developing, we really need to talk because, we want a smart city challenge.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and get those. But you're talking to Steve, so you're connected. Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You're making a long-term investment. There's not better.
we even implement
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we do that quite often. Yeah. Down in Laredo, near the Mexican border yesterday, here today, so.
that's unfortunate. We have a little event in Jim Brown's.
Oh, do you? Yeah, oh, yeah. Jim was well ahead of his time. Almost.
Now he's even looser.
ready. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Look constrained.
Welcome, everyone. My name is David Sandalow. I'm the inaugural fellow here at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. We are capping a terrific week at the Center on Global Energy Policy. We were honored to host Brian Deese, Senior Advisor to President Obama, earlier this week. Last night, we hosted Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz. And this morning, we are very honored to be hosting the Chairman, President, and CEO of American Electric Power, Nick Akins. Like all of our events, this event is being live streamed. Welcome everybody who's watching online. We're podcast also. If you're watching online, you can ask questions with hashtag CGEP events, and please follow us on at Columbia U Energy on Twitter, at Columbia U Energy.
Nick Akins began his career in 1982 as an electrical engineer, and he just kept on getting promoted. He started at Central and Southwest Corp, which merged into AEP. He held a steady succession of more and more responsible jobs. He served as Executive Vice President of Generation for AEP, among other jobs, before being promoted to President in December of 2010. Under Mr. Akins' leadership, AEP is one of the largest electric utilities in the U.S., serves nearly 5.4 million customers in 11 states. It owns approximately 31 gigawatts of generating capacity, has more than 40,000 miles of electric transmission lines, which is more than any other company in the nation, and that includes more 765 kilowatt extra high voltage transmission lines than all other U.S. transmission systems combined. In 2015, AEP's operating earnings grew by 7.6% per share. Quarterly dividend increased by nearly 6%, and my favorite financial statistic I found investigating the company is that its last quarterly payment, this last quarterly dividend payment marked its 424th consecutive quarterly dividend payment. Every quarter since July 1910, AEP has paid quarterly dividends. Nick doesn't get credit for all of those, but it's been on a roll since he joined the company. And Nick currently serves as chairman of the board of directors of the Edison Electric Institute, former chairman of the Electric Power Research Institute. He's a board member at a number of other organizations, including the Nuclear Energy Institute, Global Sustainable Electricity Partnership, and according to his bio on the AEP website, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. So maybe we'll get into whether Bob Dylan should have won the Nobel Prize for Literature in addition to other topics. Ladies and gentlemen, delighted to welcome Nick Akins.
Thank you, David. You know, the one thing I want to make sure of is that I'm not the first CEO that loses that track of 110 years of consecutive dividends being paid. So, and absolutely, we've been around for 110 years. Want to make sure we're around for the next 110 years. So, I'm going to use Bob Dylan since Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame board. And musical quotes are something I do very well, I think. But Bob Dylan had a quote, "He not busy being born is busy dying." And so we want to make sure that the electric utility industry is not busy dying. And I think hopefully after the conversation, if I leave you with anything today, it is that this industry is far from that. We are continuing to grow, we're continuing to develop technologies, and we're continuing to answer the challenges that are addressed in today's energy environment. So I'm glad that you had Brian speak before a couple of days ago, and then Ernie as well. These are very, very well-known thought leaders and obviously pushing the policy-making envelope dramatically in this industry. And we want to make sure that as practitioners in the industry that we're responding to that, but also staying ahead from several perspectives to ensure that we are viable for the future. You know, I have another quote from and some of you younger people may know this, CeeLo Green. And the quote is around balance, because when we go through energy policy changes, we need to think about the balance that needs to exist within the energy grid itself, the balance of technology, the balance of ensuring that we're able to address the portfolio needs of the future to mitigate price increases to our consumers, but also to address things like cyber and physical security that's so important for the grid today. And then as well, to focus on the aspects of policy making that need to change as a result of these technological changes that are really fundamentally changing the nature in which customers utilize the product, the way they want to use the product, and ensure that we're responsive in terms of having a resilient, reliable grid, but at the same time enabling customers to choose how they want to use the product. So CeeLo Green said, balance is key, balance is a virtue, balance is next to godliness maybe. We should all aspire to better balance. Too much of what is said in this world is one-sided, and we need more balance in our speech, in our music, in our in our art and everything. And that's true for the electric utility industry as well. We need a balanced energy portfolio that meets the needs of the security of this nation, but at the same time addresses what we need to do in the future in terms of that transition to a clean energy economy that everyone is expecting today. So as I mentioned earlier, I was going to talk about 4 different specific areas: technology, security, the customer experience itself, and then the regulatory energy policy that goes along with those particular aspects that are changing dramatically. So before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about AEP. AEP, you generally hear we serve 11 states. 11 states from a retail perspective. We have wires companies, we have generation, we have integrated operations in many of those 11 states. Then from our transmission people, you'll hear we're in 13 states because we also have transmission operations in Kansas and Missouri. But in fact, we have operations in 30 states of the U.S. And that's because of the change that's occurring in our industry, and that is the adoption of renewables, the adoption of other types of operational activities that are occurring that really are providing unique customer experiences that we're able to move forward with even without a franchise jurisdiction to do that. So you might be surprised, we have solar in New York, we have solar in Hawaii, we have solar in many aspects of this country, and wind power as well. And you're seeing that continue to grow. So you see some of the unique customer solutions being developed, and we have these types of relationships with military bases, with universities, with those kinds of ecosystems that are sort of like small cities that you can really focus on smart grid activities, you can focus on renewables implementation, microgrid type of applications. Those are extremely important for us to develop in the future. Now, on the one hand, we have the set of unique customer experiences where specific customers, whether it's large industrials, manufacturers, and so forth, want specific solutions. But you also have to be concerned about universal access of the benefits to everyone associated with the clean energy economy. So that's really the way we think about it. We're using the channel growth activities associated with these other types of resources to develop those relationships with customers, develop what they actually need, make sure the interoperability of systems are in place to support it. Those are clear indications for us as a precursor, but we need to move the regulatory side so that we can be more flexible in that approach to ensure the universal access to everyone. So technology. Many changes in technology. We have been around for 110 years. Long-term investments, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80-year investments. I would not bet against technology today. We have to think about all of our long-term investments, whether it's transmission, whether it's generation, to ensure that we are thinking about what technology can do in the future. And some of that we just don't know at this point, right? I mean, 5 years ago, you certainly didn't think about some of the things that you're seeing today. Matter of fact, I remember Germany in particular, they were adopting a lot of renewables, and I was always concerned as a system operator about the number of incursions that the system operator had to actually interject itself to make sure the stability of the system was there. Well, in 2010, there was like 4 times they had to interject themselves, and then renewables got to around 18%. And that ballooned in terms of system incursions to around 1,400 per year. But the fact of the matter is technology is changing such that there can be more adoption of renewables. But you've got to keep in mind a balanced portfolio is needed. I would encourage you to look at the PJM website. PJM is the regional transmission organization over our eastern footprint. We actually operate in 3 different reliability regions. But in that region, they have a website, and during the summer, look at the capacity that's actually serving the load at the time of the peak, and you'll see that renewables is a very, very small part of it, and the fossil generation and the nuclear generation is actually providing the most significant part of the resource requirement, and that's why a balanced portfolio is needed. Until we can have technology that provides us the ability to offload the need for demand resources like fossil generation and renewable and nuclear, we're going to have a mechanism in place where we can continue to balance out their portfolio and ensure that each set of resources is providing its own set of benefits to the grid. There's no question today you can get wind power for the energy prices are very cheap in some parts of the country. And our territories in Oklahoma, Texas, wind power is significantly around $25 a megawatt hour, or 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour is not unusual. And so, but you have to see it as an energy play. And if I can leave you with anything to think about is the difference between capacity and energy. Capacity is when you flip your light switch whenever you want to in the dead of winter or during the summer, and the electricity is there. Energy is something that's provided throughout the year. So when you think about that demand aspect of it, you have to have resources that can supply the demand. But if you think about renewable resources, at this point in time, it's mainly an energy play. There is some capacity benefit, but that's what you see when you look at that PJM website. So when you think about that balance, and I always come back to balance, there's a view toward ensuring that we have the resources in a balanced fashion, but continue that transition toward technology, toward clean energy resources, and ensuring that we're able to make that transition in a very positive sense to ensure the reliability and resiliency of the grid. So we have distributed generation applications on our grid. AEP has been for years focused on energy storage. We had some of the first NAS batteries, sodium sulfide batteries, large sodium sulfide batteries that were injected in the grid in different areas. And now we invested in a company called Greensmith, which focuses on the interoperability of energy storage devices that we've gone to customers and also in terms of small towns. To work with them to address energy storage needs. Matter of fact, I'll give you an example of an issue that exists today. In Texas, and I see this to a certain extent with the REV process in New York and in California, but in Texas, the wires company can't have any competitive energy resources or generation and by legislation. And that legislation was done back in 2000 where you were only thinking about generation, transmission, and distribution. And they're pretty much in silos. Well, today, those solutions are becoming much more convoluted at the distribution end. Many of the resources of the future will be developed either distributed resources of some kind, interoperability of smart grid related activities to drive efficiencies in the grid. Those are very difficult from a regulatory and legislative standpoint to deal with. So right now, you can't do it. But the energy storage application, there's a small town in Texas, Paint Rock, Texas. The best solution for adjusting to their demand needs was energy storage. It only costs like $700,000. Well, if you built transmission or if you built generation, it's in the multi-millions of dollars. Well, we have to file an exception with the Public Utility Commission of Texas to get approval to put energy storage solution in for that particular set of customers. And that's ridiculous in this day and time because the convolution of these resources and the interoperability of those resources to ensure that they are operating with integrity with the grid, but at the same time providing the benefits to consumers in the way that they want to use the product is extremely important. So we believe, and AEP certainly believes, that we're very focused on being that premium regulated energy company of the future that's focused on what our customers really want, how they want to use the product, and ensuring that we're developing the technology to focus on what those changes are going to occur. So when you think about some of the technologies that exist, we have our own big data Olympics. Big data, we've analyzed the data that we have. We can actually tell when a transformer is about to fail. So if you think about the quality of customer service, if we know when it's about to fail and we go replace it, then we have the opportunity to do that before you experience a failure, and obviously the customer will benefit from that. those are the kinds of solutions big data analytics can provide. We're working with companies, and I think you're going to see this develop further in the utility space as well, partnerships with all kinds of startup companies to focus on activities associated with the grid, with grid optimization, and those types of resource type activities. We're working with Tendril and Avari, C3. Utilidata was one that we actually took to a venture capital firm, but those are the kinds of companies that are focused on that interoperability with the grid to answer big data solutions for customers to optimize their energy usage, and helps us optimize the energy usage around the grid as well. So it's a win-win for everyone. And as we look at our utility, which may be different than the REV process in New York or in California, we believe our relationship with our customers is instrumental and key for our future. So on the one hand, you would think, well, why would you be trying to reduce a customer's demand charge or reducing your own revenue? Well, the fact of the matter is that relationship with the customer is key to our future. We serve, and you mentioned we serve 5.4 million customers. Actually, the number is around 5.8 million customers because we have retail operations in several states as well. And when you think about the relationships with those customers, that's what's going to now allow us to have the channel growth for the future that enables the new technologies to be deployed for customers, and we want to get out ahead of that so that we can be our customer's trusted energy advisor. When our customer comes to us, and typically our customers will come to us and ask us, how do I deploy this type of solution? And what are the options available to me? And I want to make sure that we remain that trusted energy advisor to be very objective in the process and wind up with a win-win solution that benefits customers in the future. So the other aspect is security. We have to think about security of the grid. There's no question grid, in terms of physical security, in terms of cyber security, how many have had your data stolen in any way? Yeah, I have a top secret security clearance, and mine's been stolen. So anyone's can get stolen, and that's something I think that's really important for us to understand. It's much more not only in terms of the recovery aspects of it when something does happen, but obviously with the prevention associated with it, and if it does occur, then the recovery aspects really go to the resiliency of the grid itself. We have to be responsive. We have to be upfront, working with the federal government, and this administration, the Obama administration, has worked extremely well with this, the electric utility industry in terms of the partnership with the federal government on prevention of activities, use of different tools that are available to us, and that's extremely important to continue with that partnership so that we know what the threats are and that we can actually make sure that we prevent as many as possible, but also have plans in place for the recovery aspects, because the product that we serve is really the difference between a civilized society and anarchy. We see that a lot. I mean, if you have electricity out, we saw it in New Orleans, saw it to a certain extent with Superstorm Sandy. Those are areas where we have to take seriously the ability for our customers to continue to enjoy the product that we deliver, and that's something we do in partnership with the government. So we need to ensure that continues, and we've gone through multiple drills with the federal government. With every agency of the government practically involved that has an interest in this part of the activities, including the armed forces, and that's something we continue to do on a regular basis. They're called GridX exercises that we do, and that really tests us in terms of our thinking of how we respond and think about some of the major issues. One major issue is spare parts. We continue to focus on spare parts inventories to ensure that we do have the ability to move spare parts whenever there's an outage, a significant outage. Just think about it. If you had a physical and cyber event at the same time, and it covered a large portion of urban areas in the country, then there'd be a pretty particular challenge relative to supply chain, Some of these large transformers take 2 to 3 years to get delivered. So we have a program that's at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission now, our Grid Alliance proposal, and it's actually in place now, where we're getting those spare parts and making sure that we're as resilient as we can be from that perspective. And of course, you hear about, everything from geomagnetic disturbances and those types of things, and we continue to harden the electric system. And by hardening, I just mean when we spec out devices, whether it's insulators or transformers or those types of things, they are spec'd out such that they can resist the impact of some of these types of threats that exist. So it really is an opportunity for us. It's a different world. But it's something that we have to think about in a very real sense. So from the customer experience side of things, I just want to make sure I talk about some of the areas around how we're focusing on those unique customer experiences. As we look at those experiences, customers will demand different things. They want different things. I mean, we attend and we visit our national accounts managers visit our large industrials. AEP has about a third in industrial and manufacturing, a third residential, and a third commercial load. So we have a very good microcosm of what the country represents. And there's no doubt that a Walmart will need something different than another manufacturer, Marathon or whoever, and we have to be responsive to that. So in order for us to make sure that we have a toolkit that has all the technologies that are available to us, and ensure that we're going into that customer and saying, okay, this is the opportunities that are available, we have to be there to do that, and we're in heavy dialogue with our customers in that area, and they appreciate that. Not only in terms of data farms or all the other activities, we need to be sure that we're talking to our customers, investing in our customers, and ensuring that we're able to go hand in hand with our customers to the regulators and say, these tariffs that we have in place today that take a year to get changed, that's not going to work. We've got to have, whether you call it payment plans or flexible tariffs or whatever, we've got to be able to go to our customers hand in hand with the regulator and say, okay, we need these changes in place. And that's something I think, I have 2 board members who were formerly in the telecom industry, and the admonition from them continually is, don't wait for the regulator to focus on how technologies are changing, because if we do, we're dead. And I think that's one reason why we're so focused on developing technologies, focused on partnerships to enable those technologies to continue to grow and define what the customer will want in the future. So there's no question that it's changing dramatically. From an energy policy perspective and regulatory, I'll get into that. Organized capacity markets, you're seeing some of the issues there that impact the grid as well, primarily in terms of base load generation, that generation that we require 24/7 to operate. Mainly it impacts nuclear and coal units, and so we have to really come up with a market or an organized market mechanism that supports the long-term investments that are necessary in that kind of generation. You're seeing that here in New York. New York just approved essentially a rider, a clean energy rider that supports the nuclear units in the state. And the reason for that is because the markets themselves are short-term in nature. There's no long-term capacity market or product that allows the investment in the major investments in those types of long-term resources. That's not only an organized market question, that's a question for the stability and security of the U.S. Because these are the prime movers that continue to operate the grid to ensure the resiliency of the grid and responsiveness associated with any particular outage. Matter of fact, if you look at the 2003 blackout, it stopped at AEP because of our large 765 kV system with large central station generation facilities supporting it. And that's the key to keeping the resiliency and reliability of the grid. That's going to change over time. There's no question we have a no-regret strategy around what we invest in the grid in terms of infrastructure, because technology is moving closer and closer to the customer. So you probably have less requirement for as many central station generation facilities, or in fact, from a transmission standpoint, the transmission systems are really meant to optimize the entire grid, and then smaller transmission for customer-related activities. So that's the way things are starting to develop, and we need to be mindful of how those technological shifts and how customer usage and patterns are shifting that impact that overall infrastructure planning. You know, our industry spends over $100 billion a year in just capital to replace and grow different components of the system. And probably a few years ago, a large portion of that was built on, building scrubbers and SCRs, or selected catalytic reduction devices, for coal units, and mainly from the environmental standpoint. Well, today we're making very different decisions about that. Before we spend $1 billion on a new scrubber for a power plant, we'll really take a close look at that, because technology is changing so much. Natural gas is now prevalent in many areas, and other types of resources and optimization of the grid. Why would you make that $1 billion investment? In fact, we have shut down coal units because of that. If you look at the carbon emissions of AEP, our carbon emissions have reduced 48% since 2000. And that's because we're retiring coal units. We're obviously natural gas has come into play, but energy efficiency, smart grid activities, and as well different types of resources have come to bear as well. So that's obviously a big benefit to us during that transition, to have this multiple set of resources available to us that weren't available before. So you think about tax reform. A lot of discussion goes on around tax reform, ITCs, investment tax credits, production tax credits, those types of things. We really feel like that we need to wean those so that we can make adequate decisions about what resources need to be made, decisions made in the future, and that's important for us to do. I could go on, and I won't, because I know I only have 20 minutes and then we're going to have a discussion. But I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts around the grid itself. If I leave you with anything, just think about a balanced portfolio is key for us to not only mitigate the risk of operations of the grid, but also mitigate the risk of pricing to our customers. Secondly, the electric utilities and the energy companies that are represented are the catalyst for enhancing the technology. There's no question about it. I mean, before, if you were, we've been in discussions with Google and others, and 5 years ago, everyone felt like, if you were developing technology, you could do it yourself. The utilities said, well, we know the grid, so we can do it ourselves. And now there's a rationalization that's occurring that says these new partnerships that can be developed are key to our success, because we bring the grid operability issues and knowledge to bear while the technologies are being deployed, and we can actually demonstrate the validity of many of those technologies, and that's a key thing. The other part, though, is we can ensure the universal access to everyone of the use of those technologies and advance those technologies much more quickly, because we have the scale and the ability to deploy capital to make that happen. So I would if you have a thought process that says the energy companies today, the electric utilities, are dinosaurs, that's just not the case. In fact, we're working in close partnerships with our technology providers to ensure that we're getting the best solutions for our customers. The other one I will leave you with is environmental progress is being made, and it'll continue to accelerate. With the Paris Accords, with the Chinese agreements, it's clear that the U.S. is moving toward a direction of cleaner energy economy, but we're not waiting on the government or anyone else to tell us that needs to happen. Our customers are expecting that. Our customers are expecting a transition to a clean energy environment, and we have to make our decisions such that we are moving that way to enable our relationship with our customers to grow.
And then the other point is reliability and resiliency of our electric system and how strategically important it is to the U.S. Anything that we do relative to changes on the grid, we have the largest transmission system. Anything that changes on the grid will change the flows on the grid, changes the development of the resources, the relaying, all those kinds of things that enable the operations of the grid have to be changed. So you really want to be mindful of how you change it, how quickly you change it, and ensure that it's done in a very rational and reasonable sense, because it clearly is the backbone of many of the things that we do in our society today. And then also, clearly, don't bet against technology. I mean, for us, to make a 60, 80-year investment, you really have to think twice about that with how quickly technology is moving. And if you're on the forefront of the technology and the deployment of the technology, you have a better opportunity. Now, not a complete opportunity, because there are things, I mean, we look at today, we look at a lot of new technologies, but there's technologies being developed out there we just don't know about. None of us know about. And I think we have to keep in mind that mindset as we go forward, that we need to make sure that the no regrets infrastructure investments that we make will address today, but also address the future in the context of the way technology is moving. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and I'll thank you very much, and we'll have the next session. Yeah.
For those listening on podcast, I'm David Sandalow from the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. I'm here with Nick Akins, the chairman, CEO, and president of American Electric Power. Nick, thank you for those very, very thoughtful remarks.
Thank you, David.
Thought maybe just start with some big picture questions and then narrow down to some more specific topics. You mentioned that two of your board members are from the telecom industry, which I found interesting. And people often make comparisons these days between the telecom industry and the utility industry. And about 25 years ago, there were 30 million cell phones on the planet. Today, there are 6 billion cell phones on the planet. Do you see the electric utility industry going through a transformation like that over the next 25 years? Do you think we're going to see transformations in the utility industry similar to what we've seen in cell phones over the last 25 years?
Yeah, I think you will. I think as you look at our system today, it was built around generation from central station generation, transmitted over our transmission lines, distribution, and the customer just got whatever was delivered. And it was really a top-down driven type of activity, but it ensured the best system in the world existed in our nation. But things are changing dramatically. I mean, the technology that's deployed at the customer end, and we look at it from energy storage, and we have energy storage investors here as well. Energy storage, even in your own devices, is getting smaller, more compact, more easy to use. And when you think about what's happening at the home level and the ability to optimize with big data solutions, there is no question that in the future you're going to see a lot more resources placed at the distribution side, in fact, even behind the meter. And so we have to really think about the nature of how our industry is changing as a result of that. And, while there still may be a wire connecting the house, and I know a lot of rooftop solar, you'll hear a lot about, I've got rooftop solar, that's solving my issue. I want to make sure everyone understands most everyone still is connected to the grid that has rooftop solar. Matter of fact, the giga battery factory that's being built still is connected to the grid. So, and there's two reasons for that. One is pretty obvious. If the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, you want to make sure you have resources to use your electric energy. But the other is not so obvious. Do we have any engineers in the audience? Okay, good. Because every time I talk about, whether it's imaginary power or or that kind of issue, there's a thing in electrical theory where you have to have a certain reactive power component that supports the running of motors, the startup current associated with that, those types of things. So if you have rooftop solar by itself, with no connection to the grid, you're not going to be able to run your air conditioners, and you're not going to be able to run pumps, motors, and those types of things. So that's why you're still connected to the grid. So when you think about the solutions of the future, you may in fact wind up with other solutions that allow you to do that on a regular basis, and that's going to further move the resource side of things over to the household level or the business level, whatever it may be. So there's no question that that transition will occur. How much time it takes is another question. I really believe that it's one thing when you talk about benchtop type of activities. It's another to say that it's in ready, willing, and able use in our society. Because on a common footprint approach, you want to be able to say it's commonly available to everyone. And then let's think about the other aspect of it too. What happens if a hurricane or some other activity occurs, catastrophic event occurs across a large portion of a city or state or whatever? Well, you have to think about the resiliency of that, the recovery aspects. You don't want to run on the local Lowe's or Home Depot to figure out how to put electrical energy back in place. There is some degree of commonality that will continue to exist, and you've got to make sure that supply chain is able to accommodate that kind of activity as well. So just think about it across the spectrum before you make decisions on what you think will happen.
You brought up rooftop solar, and this is one of the hottest energy policy debates in the country right now, the debate over net metering, which is happening in jurisdictions all around the country. What are your thoughts about the right way to pay for the grid and the whole net metering debate?
Yeah, so net metering obviously is an issue for the industry. It's one that we have really focused on, because if you take the investment tax credit together with the state tax credits, together with net metering, that pays for rooftop solar. So really, it's a hedge on, actually it's using all the investment tax credits. Well, when we think about it, net metering, you're still connected to the grid. And if you get the full benefit of the entire retail charge, where you completely avoid it, you're avoiding some of the investment in the grid itself to support the ongoing operations on a 24/7 basis for your household. So that's the challenging part of it, is to determine what is the value of the resource being provided, and then how do you accommodate for that within the rate-making aspects to ensure that all the other customers aren't overpaying for their and subsidizing rooftop customers. Because typically rooftop customers are higher income customers that are able to make these types of investments, and because of the full net metering in some states, it causes everyone else to have to pay for that benefit, and that's not right. And that's why I say universal access is extremely important. So there needs to be some type of fixed charge associated with the grid itself, because you're answering not only the grid operations and all the connectability and resources to support the ability to run these types of resources, but also the grid support, the security support, all those types of things that are needed from an overall perspective. So it's a challenging subject. Different states are dealing with it in different ways, but in the end, it will come to the need for paying for the infrastructure, particularly if you want it to transform to accommodate larger scale renewable resources to be attached. You've got to have the systems in place to be able to support it. You're asking the system to do very different things than it ever was asked to do before. So investment's going to be required to do that. And that's why we really believe that. Now, let me just say something about universal scale solar. Our industry calls utility scale solar universal scale solar. we call rooftop solar private solar, so that our customers really understand what is the difference. Universal scale solar, which is utility scale solar, is half the cost, same environmental benefit. So when you think about it, if you do it organized from a community standpoint, you have the opportunity to get synergies out of that kind of development. And so that's a real opportunity. Less taxes are getting paid as a result in terms of the credits that are coming back. And then that's a real opportunity for us to make a true environmental benefit across the board. And it's also controllable from a grid perspective. So when you think about the benefits of universal versus private solar, it's an amazing distinction that I think many people don't realize.
You operate in 30 states. You said you also operate interstate transmission lines. That's a lot of regulators you're dealing with. Could you talk about the challenges associated with so many regulatory regimes?
Yeah, we have the 11 states, and then we have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and SEC at different times as well. But multiple sets of regulators, multiple sets of agencies that we deal with. I mean, today, and as you well know, with Congress being so conflicted on anything getting done, and then you have the Supreme Court, well, they seem to be political as well. The president and the administration and the agencies of the government are the ones that really are driving public policy. And so we have to be very focused on our interaction with those agencies, and as well our regulators, because our state regulators approve paying the bills. So sometimes we get caught in between. Sometimes I always say we're sort of like that ride at Disney World, Pirates of the Caribbean, where you're in the boat in the middle and they're firing at each other and you just hope you make it through. As a long-term investor, we want to make sure we make it through, and the way you do that is to focus on our customers and what's happening there and go arm in arm with our customers. But it is always a challenge because some of our commissioners are elected, some of them are appointed, and they have their own agendas, their own skill sets, the learning. We see this more. Our commissioners are changing out more frequently. So an education process is required from that perspective as well. So it's particularly challenging. But at the same time, that is our business.
Could you talk about the Clean Power Plan, which is one of the more uncertain pieces as a result of a stay by the Supreme Court, and it's now in litigation? How does that impact your business?
Yeah, so we worked extensively with the EPA on commenting, but also working with them on the Clean Power Plan. The original Clean Power Plan, we were against the original proposal because we saw the issues associated with how quickly we were trying to make a transition and the impacts on the grid itself and retirements of generation. Retirements were occurring too quickly. It assumed that natural gas would be in place where pipelines weren't there and available, and then the renewable technologies themselves weren't as far enough along. But in the dialogue that occurred, the final rule of the Clean Power Plan was something that we saw as something we could work with. It was, while aggressive, it certainly gave us an opportunity to really focus on the transition that needed to take place across the board in terms of moving to that clean energy environment. And so it changed our way of thinking. Now, regardless of what you think about how, whether the Clean Power Plan is going to get overturned or not, or whether it will succeed or not, there will be something. Because we had Waxman-Markey before that, a few years before. We supported Waxman-Markey. And obviously Congress didn't move forward with that for various reasons. We really felt like it was important because it provided allowances to mitigate the price increases to our customers, but also achieve the targets were 19% by 2020. We've well exceeded those targets. So I think the innovation that's occurring and the decision process that we're going through is going to be very helpful in that process. But at the end of the day, we need to continue to recognize that all of these resources available to us in the U.S. have really provided us energy security, and we need all of those resources in a balanced way to continue to operate the grid and really live the way Americans expect to live in this country. So, I think it's an important catalyst, and it is a catalyst for that transition.
You recently sold some coal-fired power plants. Could you talk about what was behind that decision and where you see coal-fired generation in the Midwest going?
Yeah, so we did sell one of our coal units. We retired several of our coal units. Matter of fact, we've retired over 25% of our coal fleet. We were the largest coal-fired operator because that was all that was available in the Midwest part of the U.S. There wasn't any natural gas to speak of before shale gas. So all the investment, and obviously we didn't have renewables and those kinds of things when those investments were there. So it was predominantly coal. We were the largest emitter of carbon and largest coal operator in the country, maybe the hemisphere, but that's changed dramatically. We retired 25% of our coal fleet. We just sold one of our coal stations and 3 gas stations, but that was really done because of the market mechanics that I talked about earlier that don't support long-term capacity. So for those, our investors, as you mentioned, over 100 years of quarterly dividends getting paid, our investors expect long-term continuous growth from a dividend and earnings expectation perspective. So that means that our portfolio needs to represent that. Well, in competitive markets where the volatility of the prices getting paid, since it is volatile, just doesn't match what our shareholders expect. So we really moved on those assets to sell those. So it's important for us to understand there's the market mechanics piece of it, but then the environmental piece is also driving a different view. If you look at our resource plan for the next 15 years, it's 3,000 megawatts of solar, 6,000 megawatts of wind, and 4,000 megawatts of natural gas, and the rest of it's energy efficiency, smart grid activities, transmission. So you can see the transition in the decision process that's being made. And that's just what it stands today to be. As technology progresses, may be very different. And as you know, we won the Smart City Challenge in Columbus. And we were part of that process because we saw the innovation, we saw the ability to put resources in place as an extension to even transportation. That was focused on transportation, on EVs being used in low-income areas. And that is an opportunity, but the extension of that is to drive to these other sets of resources, whether it's energy storage technologies, certainly solar, universal scale solar, those types of things, and driving the interoperability with the grid. So that part of it is, a lot of it's yet to be seen, but it's the new frontier.
You mentioned electric vehicles. Do you see a day in which electric vehicles become grid resources and they're providing energy back into the grid and helping with grid management?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a real opportunity to do that as that interoperability continues to improve, battery technologies continue to improve, and also from a storage standpoint, that really is part of the solution of what we talked about earlier in the telecom arena. There'll be some part of the demand and energy resources that are driven by these types of solutions. And electric vehicles is the huge driver for that to happen in terms of battery technologies. I mean, you see the number of electric vehicles, and more are being released now. I happen to know because I'm looking for an electric vehicle, and so I'm really to a point where in cold weather climates, battery technologies don't do as well. But it'll continue to improve, and we'll be able to have more electric vehicles, and that really drives to another question of the electrification of the economy. If you look at the overall electrification of the economy, whether it's transportation, whether it's other things that are occurring in terms of demand and resources, we have a real opportunity to optimize all of that together and ensure not only the operational integrity for our consumers, but also the environmental benefits as well.
It's a lot of wind you're talking about developing. How are you going to site that? Where is that wind going to be, and what challenges do you see in developing that wind?
Yeah, so we're developing wind. We serve the 11 state territory that we've talked about. Mainly, it's Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, but wind power will be Oklahoma and Texas. And then also in our Midwest, you're seeing it being developed in Indiana, Michigan. Those closer to the plain states you get, the better wind capacity factor you have, so the benefits are really there. So that's really an opportunity for us to focus on the wind power of the future. But as we look at each individual jurisdiction, we have 7 operating utilities in various states. And those utilities work with the regulators, and actually that's why the Clean Power Plan is somewhat of a catalyst, because it makes us think about what those resources are for the future in each individual state. Well, if each state is looking at its own portfolio and wants to move to a clean energy economy, then it's going to drive to those types of solutions. May not be the same for every state. Some states may look at solar, some may look at winds, a combination with energy storage or other technologies, natural gas. Those are clearly opportunities for us to manage that transition.
Just a reminder, I'm David Sandalow with the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy. I'm here with Nick Akins, the President, Chair, and CEO of American Electric Power. Nick, you're the largest operator of transmission lines in the United States. Could you talk about the regulatory environment that you face with transmission lines and in particular the challenges of building new transmission?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the largest transmission provider in the U.S. and there's always a challenge. No one wants transmission in their backyard, although we've developed a new bold line that everyone should want in their backyard. It really is an elegant solution. We have a patent. We just received a patent for it from the U.S. government, and the first of it's getting built in Indiana. But transmission is always an issue. Now, the question we have to deal with is, what is no regrets transmission? And as we move forward, we're thinking about the vitality of the transmission system. And we have a transmission system. We're replacing some transmission lines that are 100 years old, which is sort of hard to believe. But just the pure and simple, the refurbishment of transmission is a challenging and daunting task. But when you think about expansion of transmission, then you're really into the need to obtain permits, to go through that cycle. And we've always talked about this. The last large 765 kV transmission line that we put in place took 14 years to put in place, 2 years to build, 12 years to get the permitting for. So it says a lot about the development of transmission, the holdup associated with that. So we really do have to have some mechanism that provides a strategic sense around the need for transmission, particularly if you're trying to take renewables at their most optimized point in the Midwest and bring it to the load centers. And we've been successful doing that, but it has to be well planned, well coordinated, and the investments. And I think the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has done a good job of enabling transmission to get those types of investments and get built. A lot still to be done, but we are making progress. The bold line, though, I want to talk about a little bit because we were talking about China earlier, and China is moving toward a large, very large system of 1100 kV and above. And if you try to do that in the U.S., and I don't know if you've ever seen the transmission lines of that scale in China, they are huge. To try to do that in the U.S., in my mind, would be problematic because the U.S. wants to minimize transmission. And you also obviously have to go through a lot of permitting and landowner issues and that kind of thing. So our bold line actually is just an arc. It's all it is an arc with a pole, obviously, not the lattice structures that you've seen in the past. So it's really elegant design from that perspective, and it takes half the right-of-way, delivers twice the energy. So for those types of applications in urban areas, it could make a lot of sense. So on the one hand, the Chinese are moving bigger, and then we're moving to optimizing the energy flow smaller. So it may be a combination of the two and for the future of the world, but we have a long way to get there.
In a moment, I want to throw it open to the audience because we've got a lot of expertise here, but touch on a few other topics, starting with nuclear. What are your thoughts on the future of nuclear power in the United States?
So I'm really a proponent of nuclear being a part of the portfolio, and I'm supportive of the support that's given for nuclear stations to continue to operate, because it is an important piece of the not only the baseload requirements of the U.S. to ensure the reliability and resiliency of the grid, but also from a carbon footprint perspective. From an environmental standpoint, certainly from the carbon standpoint, it's going to be important for nuclear to continue to survive. So existing nuclear is something I think that you sort of have to separate, because new nuclear is quite a challenge. There's very few places in the U.S. actually, Georgia's one of them, where 2 nuclear units are going into place, and South Carolina as well. You have to have very firm regulatory and legislative support for nuclear, and so and if it's $7 billion per unit with a 15-year permitting and construction cycle, that introduces a lot of risk. And think about my technology discussion earlier. You know, with technology moving as quickly as it is, with natural gas prices as a bridge or whatever you want to call it for the future. You're really challenged to make those 60, 80-year decisions. Now, that being said, I think it's important for the security of the U.S., and somehow we need to come up with a mechanism that says we're going to continue building nuclear, because as these nuclear units retire, which they will, we need to have replacements. There's focus on small modular nuclear reactors. That's a potential, because you have brownfield sites, whether it's retired 200 megawatt coal units, you can put those kinds of facilities in, which are smaller modular nuclear reactors. You could use that for those kinds of efforts. So I'd like to see that progress, because smaller capacity segments, you can operate it probably better, but also in terms of the commitment made from a financial standpoint would make more sense as well. But the large central station generation facilities will be difficult to come by.
You focused on security in your remarks. I wanted to ask, just starting with physical security of the grid. There was a incident that got a lot of publicity a couple of years ago in the Bay Area, where rifle shots taken at some transformers. What are your thoughts on the physical security aspects of the grid and how we protect the grid from those types of attacks?
There's no question we're in a different world today. Not telling anybody anything they don't know. The grid is put together in a very resilient sense to begin with. It's planned that way. Automatic responses from relay settings and those kinds of things that automatically rejigger the system to continue to operate. But there are critical facilities that we pay particular attention to with different types of physical barriers, physical monitoring, those types of things, to ensure that these critical infrastructure remain in place and are watched very closely. We're the only industry that has mandatory critical infrastructure requirements, and we really take that on seriously. So you'll see different stages. We built a substation in just outside of Columbus, $250 million to build this substation, but several million just to put in the physical aspects, whether it's barriers, whether it's monitoring, and other types of devices that we use. I think it's going to be even more important in the future from the U.S. standpoint to ensure that these critical facilities are maintained, operated, monitored, and defended in a very real sense. There's no question about it.
Do regulators, in your experience, tend to endorse the investments for these types of security measures, or is it a challenge sometimes to get approvals for those?
No, we haven't had any problem with our state regulators, because they understand the importance of that particular function. You know, typically, when it comes to state regulation, if you're investing in infrastructure, and in particular investing in security of infrastructure, there's no problem with obtaining recovery from that perspective. So, and many of them have proper security clearances as well to have those kinds of discussions.
There's an incident that got attention in the Ukraine last year where their cybersecurity attack took down a portion of the grid. Could that happen here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so you never say never, and certainly we learn things from each event that happens. And obviously in the Ukraine, this is another point where the government has really worked well with industry. We were called in very quickly, and to have discussions about what events occurred, and there were lessons learned. Many of those we are already deployed. We have our systems separated to a large extent. We have multi-facet type of authentication for our control devices. That's extremely important for us to really be mindful of what not only those kinds of prevention issues, but also just the information flow itself. Where's the information coming from, and how we connect with our suppliers, how we connect with other connecting parties to our devices. So a lot was learned from that. It could happen if the proper prevention techniques are not employed, and at least from AAP perspective. And I can tell you, probably 5-6 years ago, there's probably 1 or 2 people working on cybersecurity, and now an entire floor of our One Riverside Plaza corporate headquarters is cybersecurity. And if you look at the amount of storage data that we have, 2/3 of our storage data is cyber related. So you look at the magnitude of what's been done, there's no question that we've taken this seriously.
You mentioned Big Data Olympics in your remarks. Could you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so we had a group of employees come together, and actually it was enlightening. To have a group of employees from different backgrounds, from different skill sets. Some of the more seasoned employees may be less likely to know about apps that are out there, but younger people come in and have a very different view of what's available. And you bring people together and you look at, okay, this is the data that we get from our meters, from our AMI meters, and those types of things, and tell us what we can do with it, what can we learn from it. And from our system as well. We have all kinds of data coming in from our system. So we brought people together and focused on, okay, what can we learn from that, and what can we deploy to ensure that the customers continue to improve the quality of the service. And the Transformer solution was one that came up through that, but there's others. And we actually have entered into a collaboratory with even other people outside of the electric utility industry. We have a consortium in Columbus with Nationwide Insurance, the Limited, banking, healthcare. We're working together on big data analytic solutions to help us understand not only how we segregate out our customers, but also what can we do from a system standpoint with the data that we get. And that's a hugely critical part and a precursor for us to be able to deploy the proper technologies based upon those unique customer experiences.
So if you have a question for Nick Akins, President, Chairman, CEO of American Electric Power, please go up to the microphone. And while people do that, let me just ask you one question of local interest. You mentioned you have some operations here in New York. We have a regulatory reform process here in New York called Renewing the Energy Vision. Any thoughts about the New York REV process?
Yeah, so, and I certainly have talked to Con Ed and others about this, because we have an ongoing dialogue within the industry of will the industry be relegated to being a distribution system operator without essentially a connection to the customer. And the REV process started out where it appeared that the utilities weren't really going to be involved until finally realized that, well, we may need the utilities to be involved, and you continue to see that opportunity to develop. Our view is that, as I mentioned, the convolution of what's happening in the distribution with resources and interoperability of the grid, that's going to drive a different solution for us. So, and I think the REV process will enable a lot of those types of activities. The question in my mind is, will the utility be able to have that connection with the customer as that trusted energy advisor? That's still questionable in my mind. And the same is true in California. You're seeing the same type of thing develop. So, and I would hate to go that way. I think the REV process is important to the development of technology and the deployment of technology, microgrids and so forth. But that relationship with the customer is still in question for me.
Great. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Omar Ghani. I'm the CEO of a company called Kilowatt Labs. We develop technologies for storage and distribution. Thank you for a very insightful talk, Mr. Akins.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, you mentioned that utility solar is very cost effective compared to private solar. And you're right, in private solar, it's a grid-tied system and you're actually connected to the grid. You're using the grid. So my question is, if there is a system available today which handles torque load, harmonics, power factor losses, and along with solar and storage provides a solution where you can take a customer independent of the grid. So from a company like yours, an AEP company like yours, from a regulatory perspective, can you sell these systems to customers? And if the commercials work, would AP as a company be willing to do this?
Yeah.
Because it adds to your renewable portfolio standards because
Right.
you're adding generation, but it works at the customer end.
Yeah, and Omar, thanks for the question. Absolutely. The technology being developed at the customer side, if there's energy storage technologies that allow for better use of rooftop solar or any resource that's applied from a residential standpoint or a commercial standpoint, we feel like we want to be able to make that available to our customers. Now, the first premise of your question was around, will the regulator allow you to do it? And we've really driven our solutions based upon those unique customer solutions driven by purchase power arrangements that develop those types of relationships. We're still working on the regulatory side within our states to enable us to have some mechanism in place to provide, again, that universal access to everyone. So if it's a certain type of, and I'd rather get away from calling them tariffs and call them payment plans, because in the telephone industry, you pick and choose what you want. You should be able to do that from the electric utility perspective as well, and we should have the flexibility from a regulatory standpoint to do that too. So we're saying, okay, this works from a customer side, and that's what customers are asking for. Regulator, will you allow us to have some kind of flexibility from a tariff perspective or payment plan perspective to enable us to deploy these technologies at the customer end as well? And that's being tested with the Smart City Challenge, being tested with some of the approvals that we're expecting from the Ohio Commission, and in other jurisdictions as well. But it is a key component because you get into the question of, okay, should the utility be doing this? And there's various opinions of that. Obviously, I have my opinion. But I really believe if you want universal access, which drives the volume to ensure that you get the ready adoption of these technologies in a much more quick fashion, then you need the utilities involved with that.
As a follow-up related to that, do you think there should be more time of use payment plans or tariffs, as you put it? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I do. That seems to be the holy grail of some of the being able to efficiently operate the systems. Time of use activities. Now, again, you're weighing the difference between one set of customers versus another set of customers. In the public debate, you always get into how much do we want to segregate that out because it may drive different right. charges, unintended consequences to other customers. So you have to make sure there's a balance there, but have some mechanism in place where you do get the price signals so that you can make wise decisions about the product that you're using.
Hi, I'm Ken Kramer. My firm,
Hi, Ken.
Rushton Atlantic, is a financial consultant.
Yep.
Thank you for being here today, Nick, and
Yeah, Ken.
nice job finding a CeeLo Green quote that was both on point and suitable for family audiences.
Yeah, I looked at some of the others, and yeah,
don't
you're
go
right.
there. I have a Utility 2.0 business model question touching on some of the rev stuff you had talked about earlier and other things going on in the world. Had the opportunity at Ref Wall Street to ask Richard Kaufman about, now that the utilities and the commission have been talking to each other for 2 or 3 years, when do we see, at least the first phase of the new regulatory regime in place? I don't think he was real happy with that question. And his answer, as I understood it, was they don't really know how to negotiate that yet. They have to have more experience in the DER world negotiating with suppliers, and then have a better sense of, okay, here's a realistic sense of how we think we can operate in the brave new world. On the other hand, you've got people like, Larry Kellerman in 21st Century Utilities putting forth, we should have a rate base for every ratepayer, and they could put everything but solar cells to efficient refrigerators on. In an ideal world, given all the regulators you deal with and can't control or predict, what would be, the ideal Utility 2.0 sort of in the brave, clean, decarbonized world? And DER-friendly world, what would you like AEP to look like?
Yeah, so we give this a lot of thought. Actually, I think that the first premise of your question around are the regulatory agencies and the utilities making progress in that dialogue? I believe we are, because the regulators are recognizing that the world is changing, and certainly we have as well. I think it's imperative for us, though, to not try to convince the regulator that this is right. I mean, in the past, it's been utilities filing rate cases, and then we try to demonstrate, and try to advance the notions within that rate case. This is going to require a continual evolution and a continual discussion with our regulators, outside of rate cases, outside of any of the other activities, because the world is changing too quickly. Technology is moving too quickly. So we need to be able to walk into our regulators on a regular basis with our suppliers, with our customers, and saying, these are the opportunities that are available, and at the end of the day, I'd rather see AEP in a position to where we do have flexible type of, whether tariffs, payment plans, whatever you want to call it, so that we can have the ability to instantaneously cater to someone's needs. And then at the same time, the commission needs to decide how far do you go with that within the social construct of providing reliable supply to everyone. And so that is still being determined. We would like to see it pushed more toward allowing more real customer choice around what they use and how they utilize their product. But at the same time, they're going to have to help us work out that social society consideration of basic universal supply. I think AEP is certainly focused on, because we are focused on our customers and our customers first, that they're going to enable us to move the regulatory agencies forward, and we have to maintain and keep our eye on the ball of the customer, not the regulator. And that's what's key for us. So I think it's going to drive to that solution set that says we have a heck of a lot more flexibility than we have today. We have the ability, because we have that flexibility, we can move technology much more quickly with customers. And if there are needs and necessary changes that are required, the commission, by being brought along, can be much more proactive in terms of how they not only put the rules out, but also in terms of how they react to any kind of considerations we may ask for. So I think there is progress being made, but the progress is really being driven by everyone recognizing how quickly technology is moving.
Thanks for starting to get to the end. Why don't we take 2 questions at a time and then let you respond? Okay. So Please, sir.
Sure. My name is Richard Reese. I have a background in electrical engineering. And that's been my career for many years. And right now I'm transitioning. I'm actually working with the Maryland Sierra Club as their energy chair. And I think having a good understanding of how electricity really works helps me in that role. But I also think of other stakeholders who are often not taken into account with respect to energy decisions, specifically people who are affected by air pollution and other types of pollution. And I want to know what your company is doing to address that, and not strictly in a regulatory mode, in terms of just being responsible to your communities.
Yep.
So we take one more, if that's okay, Nick, and then come back. Yep.
Thank you for visiting our campus today, Mr.
absolutely.
Akins.
Thank
My
you.
name is Grant Van Weingarten. I'm an MBA student here at Columbia. My question is, Columbia graduates and graduates from schools across the country want to work for industry leaders. How does AEP stand out amongst its peers to attract the builders of tomorrow's grid?
Okay. So going back to the first question, I would ask that everyone look at our corporate accountability report, because you'll see the transition that the company has made. One that originally was focused on operations of the grid, the investment in generation, all that kind of stuff. Today, if you read that corporate accountability report, it'll tell you the transition that we're making, much more forward-looking in terms of our movement toward a cleaner energy economy. We recognize that. We also take very seriously the resources that we have in place, the way we manage everything from ash ponds to other types of resources. You know, we've reduced our, I guess since 2005, we've reduced our mercury by over 85%. We've reduced our SOx and NOx by approximately 95%. Our carbon, as I mentioned earlier, continues to be reduced. It's down 48%. So we continue to make that progress through the transition, and we're very focused on working with stakeholders in that process. And Sierra Club actually has been one of the stakeholders that we've continually, we have a regular series that we have with NGOs to give us perspective, but at the same time, we've shared the challenges that we both face, and in fact, we've been able to work with several NGOs on many of the solutions that we've progressed with. So I would say that we've been very proactive in the outreach program. We've been also very proactive in terms of the transition that we're making, and it's very clear, as far as my company is concerned, that decisions are being made very differently. If you were to ask us 6-7 years ago, we did everything possible to keep a coal plant running, period. I mean, if there was an outage, we kept it running. If there was, and it took us 10 years to make the decision to retire the first coal unit. But today, the decision is very different, because we know where our customers are wanting us to go toward that cleaner energy economy, and we have to be, and if you look at the NOVs, notice of violations, we have actually, there's years where we have 0 NOVs, and for a company our size to have 0, 1, 2 maybe, but most of the time it's 0 is just tremendous. And that includes spills of any kind. It includes any kind of emission variances, those types of things. So we're very mindful of what operational excellence and environmental stewardship means to not only the way we're seen as a brand of the company, but also how effective we can be in Washington and other places from an energy policy perspective. The prerequisite is our operational credibility and our integrity and ethics around that. So I would encourage you to look at that corporate accountability report. I'm an electrical engineer as well. And a lot of discussions are centered around the real world implications of the transition and how quickly we can make it versus some of the idealism about the way things can be, and we have to manage and progress along that medium. It's somewhere in between, but that's the way it's worked. And then on the second question, we were the first utility to have an integrated capture and storage program in the world at one of our power plants, our Mountaineer power plant. And I'd have young engineers and young people who came to work for the company, and I would tell them, you should be happy working for this company because you have an opportunity to change the world. And I can list you a mile long the number of firsts that AEP, we take very seriously our ability to not only advance technology, but the integrity and the ingenuity around what we do. And there's the list of firsts. If you have our last book was the last 100 years of AEP, it has a list in the back of the first supercritical, the first 765, the first bold line, all those types of things really say a lot about what AEP wants to do. And now we plan on being, and we are a leader, at least we're told we're a leader from an energy storage perspective. We're going to be a leader from the implementation of the new technologies that focus on the energy of the future. So most young people that come to our company, they don't realize we do what we do. I mean, you have this vision of large central station generator that's 50 years old, and you just keep running it, and that's the nature of the company. But it's far from that. I mean, you're in big data, you're in big data analytics, you're in technology that's being deployed I mean, it is truly an amazing time in our industry. And so, and also the financial, from an MBA perspective, the financial aspects of what we're dealing with is tremendous. I mean, our capital budget's gone from $3.5 to $5 billion a year in the last 3 years. We look at our credit metrics, all those types of things, and the decisions that we can make in the future. But the capital deployment itself is just a huge undertaking as we change the priorities of the corporation. So, and then leadership and culture. We're doing so much to change the culture of our organization because that is a prerequisite for us to achieve any of the objectives we have. We need more entrepreneurship, we need more agility, we need to be able to have a diverse workforce that is focused on making sure we're an open, collaborative workforce that can work together to achieve the objectives we have. So I think it's a great time for AEP.
I can have people lining up with job applications here right after this talk now. We have 5 minutes and we have 3 questions waiting, so why don't we please very quickly identify yourself, short questions, and then we'll give final words for Nick. Yeah.
Hey, good morning. Lucas Pafera, a reporter with S&P Global Market Intelligence. I just want to go back to David's question about the recent sale to Blackstone and ArcLight. What did you learn from that sale process, and what advice would you have to CEOs maybe contemplating similar sales?
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, Julian Olidort. I'm a student at the School of International and Public Affairs doing energy management and policy. You touched upon energy security, and well, of course, you operate here in the States. You mentioned you mentioned briefly Ukraine. What relationship do you have, a security relationship do you have with any foreign companies and nations? And are there any lessons that you've either taught to or learned from other companies and other nations in terms of security policy?
Yeah, so we're very... Oh, go ahead. Next question.
Rajiv Chowdhury. My company invests in solar and wind projects. My question is about the price of electricity. What do you see happening to prices of electricity in the next 5 years? And the background of the question is, in New York City, for example, over the last 10 years, we have seen the price go up faster than faster than CPI, and mostly because of transmission and distribution. The cost of electricity itself has been relatively flat. What do you see happening in the next 5 years? If you could break it down between the T&D and the electricity itself.
Okay. Good, good. So I'll quickly answer all three of these. Regarding the sale of assets, we went through this process. It turned out to be a very robust process because of the assets being sold. What really is the teaching moment from that is that we have organized markets that do not properly evaluate the cost of operating baseload capacity. And so you're seeing it across the board in all the organized markets. That's why you're seeing support of nuclear units. We tried to get a purchase power arrangement in Ohio, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission put a damper on that. But you see states trying, and Illinois is looking at it, and others as well. You see states reaching out and trying to do something to provide support for these types of assets. And while the regional transmission organizations have moved some point to really look at the stability of supply and those types of things to reinforce value, it's not enough. And so even in PJM, there's a 1-year capacity market 3 years in advance. Well, that tells you it generally drives to marginal cost. And and you have to have investment in these units. So the message there is that unless you have that kind of ability to invest in the long term, it's going to be left to investors who are really looking at from a different standpoint. I mean, mainly it's a bet on natural gas prices. Mainly it's a bet on shortage of supply that drive the economics of that kind of thing. And you really have to think about that in the context of this is a product that we depend upon from a demand perspective, and it's not something where you want the demand constantly, the supply constantly chasing the demand, because that difference is brownouts and blackouts. So you really have to be mindful of what's going on here. But in that context, it's really to a different type of shareholder. And then as far as the security relationships are concerned, most of our security aspects, particularly as it relates to foreign governments, is through the U.S. government, because we want to be very careful about how we communicate any of the issues that are ongoing from a cyber and a physical sense to foreign nationals. I mean, we have to report that when we have those kinds of conversations. But it's important for us to let the government do its job around understanding what the threat scenarios are with nation states and other type of threats. We, as an industry, need to understand how those threats can impact us and our credibility in terms of supply. And we have a great relationship from that perspective and are using some of those tools. But we don't, as an individual company, go out and have conversations with other international partners about issues of grid security. Price of electricity. I think price of electricity and you have to look at the price of electricity versus your bill for the month. If you look at the bill for the month, and if you're taking advantage of the usage associated with it, getting some kind of pricing mechanism in place where you understand the product you're using. We have energy efficiency programs that try to educate customers on unplugging their everything from your cable box to your chargers to your electric strips. All those types of things that we really just leave on all the time certainly have an impact. So I think it's a lot about education to moderate the impact of electric price increases. Here in the Northeast, your rates are about double what they are in the Midwest. In California, they're about 3 times as high. And the reason is because of the resources that are being used. But I would see in the future we continue to moderate the price of energy going forward, because we have a lot of advantages if we use them in a proper fashion. Not only in terms of resources themselves, which continue to become more and more competitive, whether they're renewables, natural gas, or whatever, but also in terms of infrastructure in the grid, how we use that infrastructure, the technologies that are being deployed at that end of things that optimize the usage. That's going to drive us to looking at what the bill actually is versus what the rate may be. And so that's something we have to consider for the future.
Well, we are just about out of time, but let me wrap up with a final question on career advice for our students here.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, you kind of kept on getting promoted throughout your career, and I think we have a number of students in the audience who might aspire to a similar pattern. I wonder, do you have any broad advice for people going out into the job market today who are interested in this industry? What should they be thinking about and doing?
Yeah, so it's wide open when it comes to this industry. I mean, we're careers in cyber, careers in obviously engineering, careers from a financial standpoint across the board. We have new businesses that we enter into all the time. I think that for a young person coming into this industry at this point in time, there's so much change going on, but your ability, and I assume young people that come in are using technology in very different ways. Number one, we have to have a culture to be able to support you being inclusive in that organization so that you can bring up these big ideas, these big new ideas. I think you have to be committed. You've got to be committed to the industry, committed to what you're trying to achieve. And as I went through my career, I recognized the deficiencies that I had. And I addressed those deficiencies along the way. It's a constant learning experience. If you think you're through with school and you don't have to worry about it anymore, that's not the case. It's an area where you recognize what your deficiencies are. You interrelate with people who can help you along the way. And there's no question. You mentioned MBA earlier. I mean, from a financial standpoint, I had a master's in electrical engineering and didn't have really that much on the financial side of things. Well, I purposely made a career move within the company to go to mergers and acquisitions so that I could fully understand what's going on in the market, understand the financials, understand the issues associated with deployment of capital and all those types of things. And so it's always a career. It can be a career move. It could be going to school at night, doing whatever you need to do, but you have to position yourself with that skill set in the background to where you can take on these additional responsibilities. And I was very fortunate in that, and being in a company that was bought by the company, AEP bought CSW in Central and Southwest, and I worked for Central and Southwest. I can also speak to it's important that you treat everyone with respect along the way and ensure that you do have an open, collaborative workforce and are very, very team-oriented.
Well, Nick Akins, President, CEO, and Chairman of American Electric Power, thank you so much for joining us here at the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy. Please join me in giving Nick a big hand.
Thank you, David.